Have you ever stopped and wondered why the biggest financial storms seem to brew on the calmest seas? It's one of the great paradoxes in economics, really. How can long periods of prosperity and confidence not just end, but actually create the conditions for their own spectacular collapse?
Okay, so let's just dive right into that. How on earth could the calm, confident growth we saw in the early 2000s lead directly into the absolute chaos of the 2008 global financial crisis? I mean, it just seems to defy logic, right? Shouldn't good times just lead to more good times? Well, as it turns out, not always.
I mean, just look at this. It's a tale of two completely different worlds. On one side, you have what economists literally called the Great Moderation. From 2001 to 2007, the global economy was just humming along. Growth was strong, inflation was low, confidence was sky high. And then, bam, almost overnight, we're in the Great Recession, the biggest downturn since the 1930s. So what's the thread that connects these two polar opposite eras?
To solve this mystery, we got to turn to the work of an economist who, frankly, was largely ignored during his time, Hyman Minsky. His big radical idea was that the economic system isn't just prone to crashes, but that the seeds of the next crisis are actively sown during the good times. The key thing to get here is that risk isn't some external shock that comes out of nowhere. It's generated from the inside by the system's own success. This is it. This one single powerful quote is the core of his entire theory. Stability is destabilizing. So what did Minsky really mean by that? Well, he's saying that long periods of economic stability, like that Great Moderation, make all of us, borrowers, banks, investors, we all kind of forget about risk. We get complacent. We start to believe the good times are going to last forever. And that encourages us to take on more and more debt, setting a very dangerous trap. So Minsky broke this whole journey from stability to crisis down into three distinct stages of debt financing. You can think of it like a ladder of increasing risk that an entire economy slowly starts to climb without even realizing just how high it's getting.
Okay, so Minsky's theory starts with what he called hedge financing. This is the safe stage, the ground floor. Imagine you buy a rental property, and the rent you collect easily covers your entire mortgage, both the principal and the interest. It's sustainable, solid. But as the good times roll on, people get bolder. We move to stage 2, speculative financing. Now, maybe your rent only covers the interest payments. You're counting on the property's value going up so you can eventually pay back the actual loan. You're speculating. And finally, at the absolute peak of the boom, you get to Ponzi financing. Now, your income doesn't even cover the interest. You are 100% dependent on selling that asset at a higher price just to pay off your debts. The whole system is now incredibly fragile, basically a house of cards.
And here's the most important takeaway from Minsky's stages. As confidence grows during those stable periods, the entire economy slowly shifts. It moves away from that safe, sustainable hedge financing and becomes dominated by fragile, risk-fueled Ponzi financing. And that transition, that's what sets the stage for the inevitable crisis.
And you know what's really wild? This cycle isn't new, not by a long shot. Minsky's theory wasn't just about our modern economy. It describes a pattern that has repeated itself over and over and over again throughout history.
You see the same story play out again and again. You can go all the way back to tulip mania in the 1600s, where prices collapsed by 99%. Then there's the South Sea bubble of 1720, Japan's property bubble, the dot-com crash, and of course the 2008 housing crisis. The specific details change, but that underlying pattern of stability breeding excessive risk-taking, it stays exactly the same.
And this, right here, this just brilliantly illustrates the sheer madness of these bubbles. Get this, at the peak of Japan's bubble in 1989, the small plot of land under the Imperial Palace in Tokyo was valued at more than all the real estate in the entire state of California. Just let that sink in. That is Ponzi-level thinking on a national scale. And the parallels between the lead-up to the Great Depression in the 1920s and the Great Recession in the 2000s are just eerie. I mean, it's like deja vu. In both decades, you had rapid growth and super high confidence, a flood of cheap money or liquidity, but somehow inflation stayed surprisingly low, and investors got so hungry for returns, they started accepting less and less reward for taking on more and more risk. In other words, the risk premium, that extra profit you demand for making a risky bet, it had pretty much vanished.
So this brings us to the climax of the story, the moment the music stops. The point where that fragile system, built on ever-rising prices, finally shatters. This is what's known as the Minsky moment.
The Minsky moment is that sudden, terrifying realization that the asset prices everyone was counting on aren't rising anymore. All of a sudden, debtors can't pay back their loans, panic sets in, and everyone tries to sell at the same time. But with no buyers, prices plummet, and the entire system just collapses.
And the 2008 global financial crisis was a textbook, absolute classic Minsky moment. The mystery we started with? It's solved.
So how did this all play out in 2008? Well, lenders gave subprime mortgages to people who clearly couldn't afford them. That was a classic shift toward Ponzi finance. They did this because they believed that rising house prices would always cover the debt. But when house prices finally stopped rising in 2006, the Minsky moment arrived. Foreclosures surged, and because these toxic mortgages have been packaged up and sold to investors all over the world, the crisis went global.
This all leads to the most important question of all, right? If this Minsky cycle is just a natural part of our economic system, are we just doomed to repeat it forever? Can we ever actually break the cycle?
You know, Minsky himself was pretty skeptical. He identified this key human flaw that drives the whole cycle, what he called the effect of forgetfulness. After a crash, we're all terrified. We regulate, we become cautious. But as years of stability pass, the memory of that pain just fades. A new generation of traders and borrowers comes along, confidence returns, and slowly but surely, we start making the same mistakes all over again. Which, of course, leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought. It's been over a decade now since the last major crisis. We're in another period of relative calm, with new technologies and new narratives promising endless growth. The question we have to ask ourselves is, are we already starting to forget the painful lessons of 2008? Are we climbing Minsky's ladder once again?